about something where each week we choose a subject and take a deep dive exploring that subject. This week, I'm joined by Nick again as we delve into psychological experiments. We're going to talk about just general psychological experiments. We're going to talk about some that we've seen in movies and in popular culture, and others that have happened in real life. You ready to go, Nick?
I'm ready to roll, brother.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be good. This is Nick's subject, so he's gonna take the lead on it, and we're gonna see where it takes us.
All right, bear with me,
Hopefully, we
guys.
don't
This
lose
is
our
my
mind.
first time. Oh, well, I think we're all a little lost in the end. All right, well, let's start with psychological experiments and you. Basically, when you're coming to, a psychological experiment has to do with the mind. And an experiment is an investigation in which a hypothesis is scientifically tested. So we've seen this throughout history, where psychological experiments are done to get as a means to an end. And part of what we're going to explore this episode is whether it's ethical, where it's been used for good, bad, etc. So, Calvin, what are you familiar with when it comes to psychological experiments?
Well, the way I've always looked at it, like I find it interesting as a subject. I don't know that I want to be a part of one necessarily, and we'll talk about that later a little bit more. But um, with psychology in general, there was always part of me that wanted to pursue psychology in college. Like I wanted that to be my major for a very small amount of time. But
Yeah, you got to move on quickly from that one, but it's fascinating.
well, I took Psych 101 my freshman year, and it was just super boring because like Psych 101 is let's talk about chemical reactions and let's talk about the history of psychologists, and it's not like
The meat and
yeah,
potatoes.
it's not kind of like figuring out what makes people tick and how to read different things, and like that was the part I was interested in, the actual reflection of how people think and what they do, why they do what they do. But you don't get into that till like graduate level stuff, so that wasn't for me after all. But I've seen movies and read a lot about different psychological experiments that have happened in the real world. So I'm kind of excited to talk about those and just build a better basis of knowledge around them.
They're definitely an obscure part of our history. America, I think, has always been viewed as the good guys, but we've done a lot of this, this crazy experimentations on people to get to an end. Why people do certain things. Why was someone gay? Why did someone murder someone, etc. And those can be pretty brutal at times. I will say I got really lucky when I was in college for my Psych 101 because I had a great teacher, and she would always talk about the experiments that people did on others to try to answer those questions a lot of them have,
No, we didn't
just
get
because
into
it's
that at
something they
all.
don't understand. She was nuts, but she was cool. It was worth my money, that's for sure.
Now, yeah, but for me, it was just like, here's your textbook. We're gonna read through the chapters as they're outlined, and that was it. And it was very boring. I got a C in the class. I didn't go very often. I showed up when I needed to, and got my C and moved on with my life. So
Hey, sometimes you gotta do that. I had to do that with humanities. No, it was sociology. Sociology 101 was the most boring
I
class
could
I
see
ever
that
took.
too. Yeah, I just feel like some of these where you have to get the groundwork and the framework for it in the beginning, have the opportunity to be extremely boring, and it's like
Oh
and
yeah.
they make you write long papers about the history of this subject, and like we had to write a paper about Freud, and like he doesn't interest me, his work interests me. Like there's a difference.
hmm hmm
But you don't learn about his work, you learn about who he is and how he became a psychologist. Like that's not interesting.
Definitely not, but I think everyone's under the assumption that if you learn this stuff, you'll better understand, what he was trying to get across.
Right.
But honestly, I feel like there's tons of psychologists and stuff like that in the same, level as Freud, who I know nothing about, but what they say is still fascinating, and it still impacts me in a way that I don't think it really matters. So I'm with you on that one. I was gonna say, speaking of Freud, that dude was kind of a sociopath in a
Yeah,
bit.
he was a big weirdo.
He was a big weirdo.
I only used him as an example because he's literally the only psychologist that I can like think of off the top of my head.
I mean, he's a really, really famous guy. Everyone knows Sigmund Freud. Um, but the things he did to get those answers he was after, a lot of it in this day and age would be looked upon as kind of how we look upon like incest or something like that. It's
Right.
taboo, but he achieved a lot for humanity in a
Hmm.
sense. So, the means he took, was that ethical?
I I mean, so that's the big question about any type of psychological experiment, whether it happened in real life or you're watching a movie or TV show that contains something like that. Is
Mm,
you want to explore like should we be doing things like this to people? And my answer is probably not. Um, just because at its heart you can't like when you're testing let's say a new cancer medication
mm,
you're telling people in the control group and in the experimental group, you're telling them what you're testing. You're giving them a background of what they're signing up for. With a
yeah,
psychological experiment, you inherently you can't do that because if you tell somebody we're going to explore the effects of blah 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 on and how you react to it, that's automatically going to trigger the person to react a certain way or not react a certain way. They're going
absolutely,
they're going to go into
absolutely.
it with a preconceived notion. So you have to basically lie to them to get them to do it, and then you're telling them you're testing one thing, but really you're testing another. So I think for the doctor, or the professor, whoever is administering the experiment, there is a lot of opportunity for them to fudge the results in either
Oh yeah,
direction. It would be
play
very
around.
easy to uh, move, convince somebody one way or another to back up your thesis, basically. And so I just don't think that there's a way that it could be completely ethical. It lives. I don't think it's unethical necessarily in all cases. It lives in this gray area where that you
Hmm.
don't know whether it was done for good or bad reasons until after it's done, and usually
Well
way
after it's
after it's
done.
done.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So it's hard to kind of answer going into it if it's ethical because you don't think you're going to hurt these people. You know like what you're trying to discover and that if it gets out of control you can stop it, but a lot of times you're getting the result you want so you don't want to stop it. You want to see how far it goes, and that's where it crosses the line basically.
Hmm. That
um
natural human impulse to
right.
to
You
continue.
don't want to pull the plug because you're finding out something new, like you're backing up your thesis or completely refuting it in a way that is interesting to you. So if you pull the plug on that, you lose all this research basically, or it was tampered with. And it's just I mean anytime you involve humans in it where you can't give humans complete free will over their choices, that's going to be a messy area as far as ethics go.
Oh, absolutely. Because what are we but free will? That's part of the human spirit, and when you take that away, that's really stripping someone of everything they got. So I'm in general overall agreement with you that no, a lot of these experiments and stuff like that, especially like Freud and the crazy things he did, are not ethical. But as a I th- I don't want to. I'm not a scientist, so I can't say for sure, but I'm
Neither am I.
almost positive it's been scientifically proven that since these things happened so long ago and so far away, and to people we have never seen and will never know, there's only a certain level of compassion we can feel for these people.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think that adds to the gray area because it's like, at this day and age, you know, several, 35, I don't even know how long ago Freud was around, but a while ago.
I want to say it was 60s,
Uh,
70s, somewhere in there. But
yeah,
I don't know. I didn't pay very much attention in that psychology class, as we've
he, he
discussed already. Um,
he didn't really fascinate me all that
but
much.
but yeah, like you're saying, if we're reading about this stuff now, we're so far removed from it that it's like, okay, I don't really care what happened to those people. I don't want it to happen to me, but like they we use them to for the greater good basically to figure out what we need to figure out. And now if you look at it, you're gonna say like or sorry, if we were doing an experiment now And think
Mm.
about it, if it was your family as part of the experiment and came home a completely broken person because of what happened in there. In, 50, 60 years, they're going to say, well, that person did good because we found out a lot of information, but my wife comes home to me and is completely broken. That doesn't help me out any.
Yeah, I think that's a classic case of, all for one and one for all type situations.
Mm.
Because that would be incredibly tough, to know my wife is going in to try to solve a problem that they have to do things, electroshock therapy, stuff like that, lobotomies. That stuff is crazy. But they came to the
They
conclusion that
still
it
do
helped people out.
lobotomies. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I actually, I was listening to the lore episode about like the traveling lobotomist.
Mm-hmm.
That dude was nuts. He'd go around and do it, between lunch. That's weird.
Yeah, that's strange. I never. I mean, I guess I understand if you don't have a great understanding of how the brain works, why you would just drill into it and figure, okay, they're fixed.
Yeah, good enough.
They're
They're not
vegetable now.
speaking exactly. So, may God be with you and goodbye.
But
That'll be $300, please.
yeah, but
But
I've read that there still are lobotomies performed. I don't think it's like um, it's a common thing anymore. And electroshock
mm,
therapy is something that still goes on too, because that
I did know that
that
one.
can be effective, but it's like not to the extent that they used to do it, where they basically fry your brain. Now it's kind of
Mm.
more small impulses, conditioning type things.
So overall, if these things are still used in modern day, do you think the experiments that were done to justify that experiment to get to that conclusion in the first place, since it was done for good, was ethical?
It's
Trick question.
Yeah, still no. I mean, I think it still falls in a gray area. Yeah, what came out of it may have been good, but you didn't go into it knowing that. The
Well,
people going into the experiment who were being experimented on didn't know that the consequences of it would be good.
well, not necessarily, and I mean we'll talk about some of those later in the show. Specific experiments where these people knew what was going on going in, but it often didn't turn out very good.
Right.
So we'll dive into a little more familiar territory. I think everyone's seen at least one of these, kind of pop culture shows,
Yeah, let's
movies,
talk pop
something like
culture.
that. Let's get it. Let's get it.
That's if nothing more, we're a pop culture show, for the
We
most
are.
part.
So let's dive in, guys. We're exploring the darker side of pop culture. Um,
Depending on your
so
point of
yeah,
view, I guess. Some
exactly.
people may love this.
I think I'll love it. It's pretty fascinating. But yeah, we'll start with Stranger Things, big popular show. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. Specifically,
I'm actually
11.
caught up on this one.
Are you?
Yeah, I'm
I
glad you picked this, because I'm like fully aware of it.
It's see when I first saw it, I was just blown away. I thought it was super fascinating because this girl has been experimented on and somehow has these powers and rips open an alternate dimension, and these kids help her out. I thought it was really cool. It's
Well, yeah,
that 80s throwback stuff.
and it's not only her. She is the 11th patient, and that's
Hmm.
why her name's 11. And I think
Yeah,
I want to say in season 2 didn't they introduce a 12?
her sister.
Yeah. So they're like after her, they kept going, or at least they were doing it at the same time, I guess is how it was.
They were
Um,
probably in conjunction, I'm guessing.
yeah. But yeah, just her creation, brought on the Upside Down, which is a bad thing.
Super bad.
But once she met, the rest of the gang, Mike and his friends, she ended up using her powers for good to kind of stop the Upside Down and the Demogorgon. And but she wasn't necessarily designed to do good, to
Yeah.
protect them. Like they didn't know creating these kids would open up an alternate dimension, or
Oh
that they
yeah.
could fight them with their minds. They were just trying to see how far they could push these kids.
The human brain. Yeah. And I mean, I think 11's an isolated incident. In most of these things we'll discuss, these things do not end well, usually. Like most of her siblings, big air quotes there, um, they were kind of murderous, and yeah, they were on the run, and they were terrified, and they were scared, and they had the free will and wanted to escape and live their own lives. But they're doing a whole lot of killing to do so.
Yeah, with like the scientists and the people running this shady organization, whatever it is. I think when you push the limits like they did, that's when you've gone too far in these situations. It's one thing to create the monster, that being not the Demogorgon, but 11 and the other kids that they created.
Mm,
It's one thing to create them, but then once you realize you created that, like that's your stopping
to
point.
keep going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you keep going, that's when you turn into the villain. And obviously, the scientists in this show are one of the villains. There's a lot of different
Oh,
pieces
absolutely.
moving, but the fact that they kept doing this and kept the company running and doing more and more, like that's when you've gone too far, I guess.
It's hard. I think it goes back to what you said earlier. When you're getting, you're having success, you keep going.
Right,
I think
because you
it's
get
that natural human curiosity.
it goes to your head. It's like the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, they won the championship, but we want Kevin Durant. We want Boogie Cousins. We're not just gonna stop. We're gonna get more and more talent. So that's these people in these shows and movies. They do the same thing. They get a little bit of power, and they want to see how much they can get. That's the first and last time you'll hear Stranger Things compared to the Golden State Warriors. Thank you.
I was gonna say thank you for mentioning Golden State Warriors. There is a topic I want to discuss at the end
Oh, nice.
regarding NBA basketball.
All right,
Um,
and how the Warriors are a psychological experiment in themselves. I'm sure.
uh, yeah, sure.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Next one is this. This is more of an obscure one, and I know you, Calvin, hadn't seen it before I talked to you about it.
But I did
And
watch it.
he did watch it, and he didn't necessarily feel it, which is totally cool. I think it's one of those that you either feel it or you don't. It's hyper violent, futuristic, and Neo Tokyo type deal after the apocalypse, and a lot of gangs, stuff like that.
We haven't
And
mentioned the name yet.
basically,
It's Akira.
Akira. Did I not mention?
You
I'm
didn't say
sorry,
the
I thought
name.
I said it. Whoops.
So those of you paying attention, you know what movie we were talking about already. But those of you not, we're talking about Akira, the 1980s anime.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's definitely, they call it groundbreaking and all that good stuff.
I could see how in the late 80s, I think when it was produced, how it would be considered that. Watching it
Well,
in
that
2019, it doesn't really hold up to groundbreaking.
no, but I will say the animation is really well done.
It is.
It doesn't really look like new and computer generated. It's all hand drawn, so it's crisp. But anyway, Akira, thank you for reminding me to mention that, and specifically the character of Tetsuo, who, as part of a gang, he basically runs into this person who has had psychological experiments performed upon them to create, I don't know, not necessarily a god type omnipotent being. It's like a hive mind deal. It's super weird. It's hard to explain.
Very strange.
Or at least that's what I took from it. And he gains, powers of telekinesis and stuff of that nature. And then basically proceeds to destroy everything and murder hundreds and hundreds of people
Mhm.
because
At least.
just be well
At least
that's
hundreds
a lot
of
of people,
people.
man. He went
Yeah,
to
no, I
town.
said at least hundreds of people. It may have been thousands. I don't know. He was doing some killing though, and this is kind of this is going the other way from 11. Like 11 realized
Absolutely.
by meeting these friends, she could be good.
Mm.
Tetsuo, on the other hand, it's he didn't necessarily, once he realized his powers, he didn't want to use them for bad right away. He started kind of using them out of his own fear. Like he would get beaten up, he would get bullied a lot, or the
Mm.
rival gang would come out and attack him, those kind of things, and he would use his powers to stop them. But then once he kind of realized that he could gain more power, he could be the leader of his gang, and then that just built up and built up, and this Akira thing got in his head. It made himself push himself over the limits and to see what his limits were, and see himself become the villain. Basically, it wasn't anybody else pushing him to that. And
Yeah,
actually, everybody around him was trying to stop him, and he wouldn't let them.
yeah, he came into it with these buddies. I wouldn't necessarily say they're like super. I mean, their friendship was kind of weird in my opinion. It was kind of abusive, I guess, from the leader of the gang. But as part of a gang, you guys are pretty tight.
Mm-hmm.
So to eventually turn on them the way he did, I thought was just incredible. Like how this power, this weapon was created in this boy.
Yeah.
And what, I guess polar opposite of 11, and what we see, just pure devastation and often straight destruction.
Well, and yeah, it's when you look at both of those side by side, you see why you should never play around with something like this because you don't know how it's going to go. Yeah, you could get an 11, but you could also get a Tetsuo/Akira. Like you don't know how the subject is going to react. And once you give them powers, you can't control what they're going to do with those and how they're going to abuse them if they so choose.
Yeah, definitely not. They are. It's a tough situation to. Like we said, a lot of gray areas. It's hard to say it's right or wrong and to predict
Probably shouldn't
what's
fuck with
going to
people's
happen.
brains.
Yeah, no, we as human beings are very odd creatures, and when you fuck with us, we tend to lash out in very destructive ways.
Yeah, that's true. That checks out. I can back that up.
And that brings us to the Winter Soldier.
Oh yes. Speaking
one
of
my
lashing out in strange ways.
very, very strange ways by tag teaming Captain America, with Captain America to beat up Iron Man. Spoilers. If you haven't seen that yet, check it out. But anyway, Winter Soldier, was abducted by the Ruskies and brainwashed to basically be a super badass assassin.
Yeah, I mean it's Russia.
And
you can't expect much more out of them than that.
I mean, their president is basically an assassin, an ex-assassin type KGB soldier. So
yeah, I mean,
why
you,
not
you get what you pay for there in Russia, which they paid for an assassin, and so at least the Russians in this case, and Dr. Arnim Zola more particularly, they were smart enough to put in controls against Winter Soldier.
Absolutely.
They had they had the keywords that would trigger him. They'd put him in ice when he wasn't being used. I'm sure they had like kill switch words as well. We don't get to see that really, but I would think if they have trigger words, they probably have a kill switch word as well.
Oh yeah.
So
say lasagna and his head blows off.
Yeah, that could be it, or he just like falls asleep maybe.
No, I'd rather see that.
Okay, all right.
Go
Agree to disagree. I really like the Winter Soldier, so I don't you can't do that to Bucky. He's Cap's best friend.
Dude, he got ghosted by Thanos, man.
Oh, that's true.
It was terrible.
He'll be back.
It was terrible.
Did the arm
pretty
stay,
sad.
or did the arm go with him? I don't remember.
The arm went with him because I'm pretty sure he was holding the gun with his arm.
That's right, and the gun dropped, but the arm came because I guess now that it's vibranium, it's probably tied into him somehow. All right, I can buy that.
Yeah.
That's neither here nor there. But yeah, so that's a different way to go is to not let it get out of control, to not see yourself be the bad guy, even though, I mean, they were doing it for what the Americans would see as evil reasons, but as far as the Russians go, they're just taking out targets to make them the superpower.
Exactly.
They put in controls to help keep him under control, basically, and that's, I think some of these other teams could learn from that.
Well, I think they knew what they had when they were going. I mean, they set out to create a super soldier, and messing with someone's brain like that, you have to assume, as they did, that there's gonna be some issues. They really learned that lesson with like the second batch of Winter Soldiers, but I loved Winter Soldier's character in all the Marvel movies. I really loved when they revealed how he killed Tony Stark's parents.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he has no control over it, but to Tony that doesn't matter. Like Tony, he still did it, whether he's in control of himself or not. He still did it.
Oh, damn! Bucky broke up the Avengers.
They'll be back.
Such a jerk.
They'll all be back.
There'll be a different set of Avengers. I cannot wait to see that movie and dive into a review of that later on.
Oh yeah, we'll jump right into that after we see it, because that'll be a opening weekend type of thing.
That would be awesome. All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add about Winter Soldier?
No, I mean, just because, like, if we're talking MCU Winter Soldier, he hasn't been very well developed. I think we've talked about this before, where I think he was supposed to probably take over for Cap at some point, but Anthony Mackie did such a great job that they kind of shifted to him. So they've kind of just let Winter Soldier play on the sidelines now. But I wish they would have explored him more, and I haven't, read enough of the comics to kind of talk to him from that perspective of what he is. And the character is basically the same, but the character, he's probably a much deeper character in the comics, because they've got 50 years of building him up as a character. But yeah, so I don't have much more on Winter Soldier just because he's not that heavily ingrained yet.
Not yet, but stay tuned for Black Panther 2. I'm calling that he's going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, he's gonna have to take down Namor, so that'll be interesting.
Dude, I love that. That'd be so
I
awesome.
thought
I
Namor
hate
was
him.
gonna show up in Infinity War, but that didn't happen.
Well, technically, I think he's under the Fox banner because he technically is an X-Men or X-Man.
I don't think so.
He definitely is part of the X-Men, or at least if we're going from like recent MCU continuity, like the Civil War comics at the same time as like Avengers versus X-Men, and Namor's part of it.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
But I don't
going
think
with
I
that
don't think
theory.
historically I don't think he's part of the X-Men. I don't know.
They
Somebody
have
who knows
they
more
have
about
such a
comic
crazy
books, let us
roster.
know.
Yeah, let us know on Twitter at APA something.
That's us.
All right. We are going into a super obscure character, and I think a lot of people who have seen this movie or read this book, uh, you know, see the merit of what these people were setting out to do. And that book slash movie is A Clockwork Orange.
So I'm
And
not one of
Calvin,
these people who has seen or read the book. So this is all you. You can tell me what's going on. I'll give my thoughts, but I don't know anything about it. And don't worry about spoiling it. I have no plan to watch it.
it's pretty straightforward. It was written by Anthony Burgess, pretty good author, and directed by Stanley Kubrick.
I
So
knew that.
it has a lot of firepower behind it, and it focuses on the main character, Alex DeLarge. And he's basically, to put it bluntly, a rapist, gang member in the near future, and he gets busted for being this piece of shit. And
Sounds about right.
well, he gets his just desserts. So they try this new method on him to cure him of his disease or cure him of his problems, and it's basically aversion therapy. So they open up his eyes and they keep him open. I think a lot of people have seen that scene where he's strapped to a chair with his eyes
Yeah.
wide open, and they show him, pictures of war, killing, sex, stuff like that, and eventually any kind of like violence or sexual images make him become completely ill. Like he becomes completely incapacitated and has no
That's interesting.
life after that.
Yeah.
So what I found really, really just fucked up about that is they strip this person of his free will. Yes, he was someone who, a rapist and a piece of shit gang member who loved to commit violence for fun. But at what point does that strip him of his,
Of
what makes him a
itself.
human
Yeah.
being? Yeah,
Right. Yeah. This is another one where they're doing it clearly for the best of reasons. They want him to be not violent, basically, and
mm,
by doing that, you strip him, like you said, of his humanity, and like he can. At this point, there's no chance of rehabilitation, and he will just be a shell anytime he sees anything, and anything that could trigger these feelings, and that you can't always control when you're going to come across one of those triggers. So
absolutely
I
not.
guess, maybe him getting violently ill is better than him going and killing somebody, but there's probably a middle ground in there somewhere too that maybe they should have worked for.
That's kind of my thought. I think they take it too far. Like this dude, but he was asking for it. I mean, he's taunting them, this and that, and eventually he has to, just gets his just desserts because he is totally just a goner. And if I think something like that is completely, uh, it has merit to it, and I think it is ethical to do things like that, showing someone terrible images to get a decent middle ground, not something that far right where they're just a
Right.
shell of a
Yeah,
human.
it's basically aversion therapy is you trigger a unwanted response from something, something that normally would you basically you give them the opposite response of what it is now. If they violently attack people, you would show them that and make them in physical pain, like give them physical pain at the same time,
Mm,
so they would avoid violence at that point because they would want to avoid the physical pain. But like you said, it seems like there should be a middle ground there somewhere where it's not just they avoid it, it's they fall violently ill. Like there's a big difference between those two things.
absolutely, and I think that big difference is the stripping of free will. And
Mm-hmm.
um, we've
Well, and they
seen
didn't give him a choice in his therapy either.
they did technically
Oh, they
because
did.
he's
Okay.
serving a sentence. He's in prison, and they're basically like, "Hey, do you want to try
Oh,
out this?
gotcha.
Be a part of this, and we'll let you out." So he does it, and it totally destroys his life. And I think that's kind of it has a parallel to real life.
Hmm.
Like I think a lot of when these experiments were done, they were they were broadcast as something that it wasn't, obviously. And we've seen a lot of these experiments in real life have incredible results. One of which
Incredible, but
I
maybe not
cannot wait
good.
to talk. Oh no, not necessarily good. Most of the time, bad. I
Well, at
found it
least in the
hard
cases we're going to
to.
talk about, definitely bad.
Ooh, yeah, absolutely. And I sound so excited to talk about it, but it's fascinating. I did find another one that I wanted to
Oh,
discuss,
nice.
but I am going to open with one everybody knows about, MK Ultra. And if you don't know about it, it's basically a real life experiment using LSD and a lot of other
Oh, they
obscure.
used all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, basically to focus on behavioral engineering. So
Hmm.
mind control. Like they wanted to create someone that, basically an assassin for the Ruskies. They were trying to make Winter Soldier, but instead they made Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, they used LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, which that's definitely going too far. And
Oh
it
yeah,
says in some cases the methods they used was sexual abuse of children. So I don't know how they worked that into there, but it was very on the darker side of gray what they were doing, because a lot of these
oh absolutely.
experiments that were part of the MK Ultra were they were not volunteer. They were not volunteers participating. They were drug addicts, sex workers, prisoners, mental
Mm,
patients, basically people who could not fight back is what they were looking for.
the
And,
dregs.
yeah, and they would give them tons and tons of LSD, or they would hypnotize them, or they would put them in isolation and just see what that would do to their mind. See if they could train them to basically brainwash them to do their bidding through any of these different methods. And yeah, the MK Ultra definitely sits on the wrong side of the gray line.
Of the spectrum.
Yeah,
It was just it was absolutely terrible what these people endured, but for some of them it was voluntary. Like they walked into
there
this
were some
because
volunteers. Yes,
well, the government's like, "Hey bud, we'll give you $500 if get in a deprivation chamber for 6 hours."
right.
But
And
you
part of
can
it,
lose your
some of it
mind in
was
6 hours.
yeah, part of it was like you could get school credits for it, things like that, because a lot of
Mhm.
universities participated in it. So there's all these. I kind of think it was this way of finding as many people to do it as possible. They got these involuntary people and saw if they could get them, and then they saw if they could use the same methods to get volunteers to follow their lead. And it's definitely a not a good thing.
No. And if you don't know who Ted Kaczynski is, he was the Unabomber,
Well, real
which
quick before we
fascinating
move on
character.
to the Unabomber, I talked about this on, I want to say it was episode 23, when we talked about city I used to live in, Plattsburgh, New York, which has a lot of different paranormal things going on, as
Oh,
well
nice.
as there's an Air Force base there, which basically the Air Force base is too big to sustain the actual Air Force presence that was there at the time. So it's thought that it was a secret kind of MK Ultra facility as well, and that they were doing some of these experiments there. So go back and listen
Mm.
to episode 23 to get more information on that and the research we did on that, because one of the Columbine shooters' dad worked on the Air Force base, and then
No shit.
for like 8 years before they moved to Colorado. And then obviously the kid grew up to be one of the Columbine shooters. So that's very interesting. If you want more information on that, go back to episode 23 and listen to
I know what I'm listening to after this.
it.
All right.
But another
Sorry,
bad
go ahead.
case was the Unabomber, as you said.
Oh yeah, he was just a nutcase. Um, But speaking of, for some reason I had it in my mind Ted Kaczynski was a volunteer. Um, but here's another group of people back in 1971 who I know I'll let you take away because you really enjoy this one. The experiment regarding the Stanford prison experiment.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's another one I want to probably do a whole episode on at some point because it's so much deeper than probably what we'll get into right now.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but basically, it was this psych professor who got volunteered. These were all volunteers. He told them what was going on. There were 24 kids. He was going to split them into two groups. 12 were prisoners, 12 were guards. They were all males,
All males, yeah.
which is probably an important thing to notice or to note. And they were basically, these kids were expected. They were, I think, 18 to 22-year-olds, all of them. They were expected to fulfill those roles 24/7 for 2 weeks. They set up a mock prison in the basement of a building at Stanford, and basically they wanted to see what effects would come to people who were basically, if they were guards, put in a position of power, or if they were prisoners, have all their power stripped from them and have
Mm.
no agency. And it did not go well.
Not well at all.
it it had to be
Test
shut down after 6 days.
6 days.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
and there were people just like, people had to take themselves out of it. They were, the guards began abusing the prisoners in various ways. Like I said, we can go deeper on this in a special episode just on this. And they've made a movie about it. It's a Hollywood movie, so like, it's not 100% true, but it's out there and it's a pretty good movie to watch. But it's just crazy how quickly, like, because these are all friends or they knew each other, and like, they're all nice kids
Yeah.
for the most part, and just
Familiarity.
the switch flipped as soon as they were given just this little bit of power over somebody else, and they started abusing them.
And that's a common occurrence we've seen throughout human history. I mean, we share the DNA with the last subspecies that, we were basically authoritarian over,
Mm-hmm.
the Neanderthals.
And
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 they're all gone and we're here.
that was kind of what they wanted to see, was, what gave people power. Was it actually having power, or was it the illusion of power? Because these people had authority just because they said they did.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all the same age, they're all in the same class. Like, there's no reason that these kids should have authority over the others, but like, they sat and listened to them. They did what they said because they didn't want to be abused, and they would
Yeah.
have kind of riots in there as well. The prisoners would. So it's super interesting experiment that was run that could not have ended sooner, I think, for a lot of the kids involved in it, because
Oh, I imagine.
it was taking a toll on some of them.
I imagine there was at least one guy who was the prison bitch, and he probably wanted out big time.
Yeah, in the movie, they portray someone like that. Just basically, anytime the guards wanted to take out anything, they kind of took it out on him, and he's kind of crying in the corner, and the other prisoners would kind of make fun of him as well. And I don't remember who it was at the moment, but he got out after like 4 days. He was just like, I can't take this anymore.
Oh, fuck yeah, man. I don't want to be. That would suck. And especially, who gets to decide, like you said, who gets to be a guard and who gets to be an inmate?
I think it was random selection.
That's.
They had the
I don't know.
24 kids. I think they put them all in a hat and like drew them out that way, kind of thing. And it was They had cameras up that the professor monitoring the whole time, like, making sure they get food and everything like that. But like, I just can't. And like, as quickly as it happened, that's one of those things, like, you probably should have pulled the plug earlier. But he kind of wanted to see how far it would go until it got
Hmm.
to a point where he couldn't anymore.
Yeah, then you get into real ethical things, and
Yeah.
as a big college like Stanford, you cannot breach those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll stop that experiment there. And in the future, guys, expect an episode, a larger one, full length Stanford prison experiment episode.
Sometime.
Sometime
It's in our list.
We have long lists,
Yes.
like Santa Claus. Um, the next one is one that I've heard of at, going through college, and I've read about in the past, and it's called the Milgram experiment. And it kind of segues into exactly what we were talking about in regards to this authority is giving someone authority, and they obey it blindly.
Just like
And
Littlefinger says, power resides where the people think it resides. That's Varys. One of those two.
they're both snakes.
Yeah.
But this experiment took place in 1961, and it's basically the willingness to obey authority. So they took subjects that they could hear but not see each other, and they were ordered to shock the other subject for each wrong answer in a series of questions. Gradually, depending on whether they answered the question wrong or even answered the question right, the shocks became worse and worse and worse, and people would scream and tell them to stop, and people would pause and look to the person conducting the study, and they kept telling them to go, so they would go, and
it needs
they
to be said that
going.
No electric shocks were actually administered. They were fake electric shocks. The person on the other end was basically faking that they were being shocked. Which I think that's a way to do it where you don't necessarily cross a line, because it may because that could be difficult, because the person administering the shocks are still in their mind doing something completely horrible. So how do you bring them back for that? Even if you tell them it was all fake, like they still did something horrible.
Yeah, in their mind, they electrocuted someone to death. But they did it because I think it also kind of comes to, who do you blame? Who's to blame for that? Is it the person conducting the test, or the person that didn't say no and continued to turn the knob till the other person was dead, supposedly?
Right.
Or both. I kind of think it's both. But I really found that experiment fascinating.
Well, it's interesting to think too of what kind of authority did the person telling the other person to shock actually have. I think he was a professor, and the person basically pushing the button was a student. So, like, at some point, I would think if I were put in that position, I would stop listening to the professor. Like, I would just be like, no.
Yeah, who are you, dude? Like, buzz off.
I don't even need that much to stop listening to a professor. Like, I never felt like these professors had authority over me just because they were older than me, or like put in a position to teach. And I think I probably got that from high school, because I didn't feel like a lot of my high school teachers were good.
Worth a damn.
Yeah.
yeah. Same here,
they
brother.
Just didn't like. I went to a little private school that was very underfunded, and that you could tell by who the teachers were. Like, we had an English teacher who could barely read sometimes, and I'm not the best like out loud reader. I'm a terrible reader out loud, but I wouldn't go be an English teacher. I know my limitations there. But yeah, so like I just knew that these high school teachers, there were some that were very good teachers, but there were a lot more that were to me didn't deserve to have authority over me. I was a good student anyways, so like I would listen and do the right thing because you're supposed to do the right thing. But I wouldn't, like, if you told me to do, if one of those people told me to do something that would have hurt somebody else, I wouldn't have listened just because they're my teacher. And that's probably where I lost, by dealing with those teachers on a regular basis. I kind of lost authority, that just because you're an adult doesn't mean you can tell me what's right or wrong. Like, I can make up my own mind on that.
Exactly. It doesn't mean you're always right. And a lot of adults have done a lot of really crazy shit that if you put a kid in charge, or just, in general, someone like you in your situation, they wouldn't do the crazy shit, such as, shocking this person to death.
I would like to think that I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Until you're put in that position, you can't really tell, but I would think I wouldn't.
It's like one of those, like, would you shock someone to death for $1 million? It's like, I don't know, man. We'll see. Like, is it someone I hate? Is it like, who is it? Is it a guy that deserves to die? And who
someone
am I
on
to say
death
who
row
deserves
already?
to die?
Yeah.
Exactly. Then maybe I'll virtually turn that switch through my Xbox controller 1,000 miles away. We'll see. But I think this is one of my thoughts, that we have evolved to be this way. As a species, we've kind of, we've evolved relatively rapidly. I mean, they say Homo sapiens, as they are, have been around for like 100,000 years. So, I mean, that's pretty quick to be, modern day humans. And as modern day humans, with all these advancements in technology and stuff like that, do you think we'd ever evolve to the point where, like, telekinesis or some of these things they're trying to achieve with these psychological experiments could become reality?
Um, there's bits and pieces of this. I think, like, because you said something like enhanced senses. I think
Hmm.
that's possible, where you have somebody like Daredevil, for instance, who, um, one of their senses has been dulled, so their other senses are working overtime. I think that does happen, and I think it can happen, and I think that's more of a direction that natural evolution will take us to. I was reading something earlier. It was like a listicle about how basically modern day lifestyles are killing our bodies, or
Oh yeah.
basically doing bad things for our bodies without it. And one of
Hmm.
them was like, basically we're killing our ears because we listen to music really loudly and put headphones in, and a lot of the things we do are just too loud for our ears to handle by nature. But I think something like that, I think instead of us, progressively having worse and worse hearing, I think eventually our ears are going to adapt. Like our hearing is going to adapt, and we're going to be
Hmm.
able to handle louder and louder
Or
sounds. Now,
yeah.
our generation will probably lose our hearing very early, but in 3 generations, they'll have adapted to better handle the things that we can't handle right now. So
I find that fascinating.
I think things like that can happen. And the other thing I noticed, I watched The Predator the other day, and one of the statements that the Predator tried to make basically was that people on the autism spectrum are actually the next step in human evolution,
Hmm.
which was interesting in the framework of the movie. I don't necessarily know that that's true, but
Yeah.
basically because they think on a different level, and some of them they're basically savants in one thing but can't handle a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So that was their thesis, is that because they're that way, they just need to figure out how to hone that, or to combine all the different things to basically take the next step. I don't know that there's going to be a next like giant leap of evolution though. At least not one that we can reach on our own. I don't think they're just going to unlock the brain like in these movies like Limitless and things like that.
That's something I was kind of gonna mention is our brains are capable of a lot, but my wife works with brains, and she told me that movie is such bullshit. Like, people use their brains way more
Yeah,
than they advertise, but still, like,
yeah. The whole we only use 10% of our brains is like complete bullshit and doesn't exist.
yeah, exactly. And it's one of those myths. Like, if you ask a cop if he's a cop, he has to tell you he's a cop.
No, that's not
It's
true either.
just that is not true either. But I do think over time, what you said about like your hearing over becoming more resilient to loud noises. I think as a species, what we will reach a point where these things are more consistent. Like,
Mm.
everybody, for the most part, except for in third world countries, and as they develop, can wear corrective lenses or straighten their teeth or something like that. So, they have stronger teeth, better gums, better eyesight, better hearing. And at what point does that become standard fare for every human born? Like, every human's just born with 20/20 vision now. Like, that'd be crazy. And I think we will achieve that as a species at some point.
I think that's possible. I don't know that it'll be through natural evolution. I think to get things like that, I think it will be through some sort of genetic engineering. Basically,
Mm,
as you're making a baby, you'll get to pick and choose, or the baby will have already been made. But as the baby is cooking in the oven, as it were, you'll be able to kind of pick and choose traits. And I think that's more where we're going. Through technology, we'll be able to enhance certain aspects of our lives. And you would, for the most part, nobody's going to select. If you have a couple and you have one person who wears glasses and one person who doesn't, and you're able to kind of choose where the child falls on the vision spectrum, you're going to choose closer to the person who doesn't wear glasses, obviously. So I
mm.
think we're going to force ourselves into this through, some type of technological advancements and genetic engineering type things. I don't think
I
we're all going to be X-Men,
No,
sadly.
absolutely not. That would be dope though. But I think
Only if I could be Nightcrawler.
Nightcrawler's that dude, man. I
Love
love
Nightcrawler.
Nightcrawler. Well, there's another episode. But um I think when we like you said, every parent's going to want the best for their kid, especially if they have the options to customize their child, like a menu at McDonald's.
Like, I don't think you're going to be if you're two white people, you're not going to be able to make a black baby. Like, I
Oh,
don't think it's going
you
to be
could
like
totally
that.
do that. You could super do that. You probably do that now, but
Well, you could do it, but it wouldn't be the two white people doing it. There'd have to
exactly.
be a third entity in there.
Or some really progressive people that just are hipsters out west. But I think if you do that, and eventually the entire population has genetically modified, you know, everything about themselves, so they're the
Right.
best, that severely clashes with survival of the fittest. And at the
Well,
same
at some
time,
point, you'll only choose the strongest genes, and then you'll reach a point where you won't have to choose anymore because everybody will have the strongest
yeah, I
available.
suppose. I don't know if there's a limit to the capabilities of the human body. I mean, obviously there is a limit, but I think over time and with genetic modification, I think we could be, timeless people, which I don't know, that sounds a little crazy. But I'm curious to see, I don't know if you guys have heard, but there is a man, I believe in China, who has genetically modified children, like babies, and he's modified their genes to customize these children to a certain extent. And I'm curious to see how those children grow up and
Hmm.
what the consequences of him doing so are. Like, I know China is pissed right now.
Well, yeah, they don't like people doing things out of the ordinary there
But I
without
mean,
without the government telling them to at least.
exactly. I mean, if, I don't even know what their government's called anymore. I know it's Republic of China or some stuff, but boo. Anyway, what did this man
Michael
have to
Scott
do
knows a
to
lot
achieve
about
this?
China. You can ask him.
I just watched that episode
That's a good
last
one
night,
too.
man. I love that episode. I'll pay for the coffee, and this was a great
You
conversation.
can't let Oscar win.
I don't know. I think it's something we can achieve, and maybe eventually will. But if you had the option to undergo some of these psychological experiments right now to achieve a significant advantage, would you?
My answer is I probably wouldn't. I don't like I really like the way my brain is wired and how it works and how I think about things, and I don't like the idea of taking a chance on changing any of that. Like I don't take any mood altering drugs. I've never done any hard drugs, anything harder than alcohol. Which even that, like, I don't like getting severely hammered and not feeling like myself, basically.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks ago, I was at the chiropractor, and he asked me if I was sleeping well, and I said sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. He suggested using a type of supplement to help get better sleep. And basically, the way the supplement worked it controlled the release of serotonin, and I didn't even want to take that because like that's triggering a chemical reaction in my brain that's not supposed to be happening. I did end up taking it a couple times, and I slept worse on it, so like I don't have to worry about that anymore because it sucked.
Mm,
But like it just the idea of like my mood not being in my control was that I was uncomfortable with that. So I don't think I would go into one of these. Maybe when I was younger, if it could have
be
made me
a little more
athletically better.
reckless.
Yeah,
Mm.
if it could have like made me athletically better, but not in a way that's considered cheating, I guess I might have. But the pros would have to very far outweigh the cons.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I agree with you. Um, just because I I like who I am, and I really don't need anything greater than what I got.
Hmm.
So I think that kind of blurs the lines between why we have all these bad situations coming from psychological experiments, because it's often people with nothing to lose. Like, we have something to lose. We got people at home, we got children,
Hmm.
stuff like that. We have ties to humanity, and we don't want to go through these experiments that strip our humanity to make us into
Right.
something we
It's going
shouldn't
to
be.
change me, and then the people who I care about and care about me are not going to look at me the same way.
And, fuck that. That sucks.
Yeah.
That, guys, completes our episode about psychological experiments.
Yeah, tell us your thoughts on if you would undergo psychological experiments. If you've heard of any other interesting psychological experiments that we can look into in the future that we didn't cover here, or like movies, TV shows that cover that, let us know. Hit us on Twitter, send us emails. The email is a podcast about something at gmail.com. But yeah, we like talking about this stuff, obviously. We did a whole hour on just the idea of it, so digging deeper into some of these actual experiments will definitely be on the table for the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to say, guys, before we go, love seeing these reviews for a podcast about something on iTunes popping up. Keep at it, guys. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, reviews are fantastic. Feedback, anything like that. Interact with us on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, so just send us a tweet, and I'll probably respond to you for the most part.
Yep.
We got.
I pop in and out.
Yeah, he's there. If I remember to tag Alone podcast, Nick's other great fantasy story podcast or sci-fi story podcast, if I remember to tag him in the tweets, he usually pops in too. I forget sometimes though.
Yeah, no worries.
I don't ever mean to leave you out. I'm sorry.
Thank you for saying that. My ego was very bruised, and I appreciate it.
But yeah, follow us on Twitter. Check out Those Cats. They provide all the music for podcasts about something. Leave reviews on iTunes. We have a fully up and running Patreon page at patreon.com/podcastaboutSomething. Just last week, we put up our first Patreon exclusive, a movie review of Glass. So check that out and pay us money to keep doing this.
Because we love doing it, and I think you guys love hearing it.
And I like money.
And who doesn't like money? Money's great.
Money is great.
Stay sassy.
Stay classy.